Reading number 51 of the level 1 curriculum will give us an introduction to the concepts and basic tools of equity valuation. Please note that equity valuation will be dealt with in a lot more detail at level 2 and forms a major chunk of the level 2 curriculum. However, it is important to understand the basic concepts and the methods that we use to finally arrive at the fair value of a stock or the fair value of equity. So we'll go through the brief concepts and try to understand the basics. So the intrinsic value of a company or the fundamental value of a company is defined as the rational value that investors would place on the asset if they had full knowledge of the asset's characteristics. So intrinsic value is essentially the price that you would be willing to pay for something, or that the price that you would be willing to pay for the equity or the debt of a particular company, given that you understand all characteristics, cash flows, governance, and other components of the firm. Analysts use valuation models to determine the intrinsic value and to compare it with the stock's market price. And they then determine that whether the stock is overvalued, undervalued, or fairly valued. So if the stock's market price is greater than the intrinsic value, then we will say that the stock is overvalued. If the stock's market price is lesser than the intrinsic value, that is the fair value, it's trading cheap, then we will say the stock is undervalued. If it is equal to the intrinsic value, then we say the stock is fairly valued. Now, how do we derive the intrinsic value, or how do we determine the fundamental value, is essentially what we're going to try to study in this review. So there are various methods that we will study to compute the intrinsic value of the stock. The first category of methods is referred to as the DCF based methods, or discounted cash flow or present value models, wherein we'll project the cash flows and discount them back to derive the intrinsic value. So there are two broad models that we'll study. One is the dividend discount model and the second is the free cash flow discount model. We can use multiplier models, or also referred to as market multiple models, where we'll see the ratio of the stock price to earnings, the stock price to sales, the stock price to book value, or the stock price to cash flow, and compare it with other companies in the sector. And we will then argue that similar companies or similar goods should have similar price and try to derive the intrinsic value. We can similarly use EV to EBITDA ratio also, or EV to revenue ratio also, as we will see. Third category of models is referred to as asset-based models, wherein the intrinsic value is calculated as the fair value of the assets minus the fair value of the liabilities. Please remember, asset minus liabilities was the book value. But if I do the fair value of the assets minus the fair value of the liabilities, it should give me the market value, or it should give me the intrinsic value of the stock. So moving on to the first model, that is the dividend discount model, or so called the DDM. The most general form is to simply project the expected dividends that the stock will pay until infinity and then discount them back to compute the value of equity. Please note this is theoretically a correct model, a well justifiable model, because eventually in the long run, dividends is what equity holders are entitled to and what they receive from an asset. So if the asset doesn't pay any dividends ever, then essentially shareholders will not get any return back. Dividends may come in the future, but at some point dividends are needed if the equity holder has to realize a cash return. So if you project the dividends out until infinity, and then discount it back, we can derive the fair value of the stock, or that will be the intrinsic value of the stock. So we'll start by understanding the 1 year holding period DDM that can be calculated as the next year's dividend plus the year-end price discounted back. So calculate the value of a stock that paid $1 dividend last year if the next year's dividend will be 5% higher and the stock will sell for $13.45 at year end. The required return is 13.2%. Now, please note that the last year's dividend does not matter. That has already been received and used, and it's not going to be a part of the future valuation of the stock. What we are interested in is what dividends the stock is able to pay us in the future. So if it paid a $1 dividend last year, that is at t equal to 0. Please note this dividend does not matter. What matters is the dividends that will come henceforth, t equal to 1, t equal to 2, so on and so forth. So at t equal to 1, the expected dividend is 5% higher. That is 1 into 1.05. And the stock we are given will be able to be sold at $13.45 at year end. So if we hold this stock for 1 year, the total cash that we will get from this stock at the end of the year would be $1.05 of dividend plus 13.45 is what we will be able to sell it for. The value of this stock today, that is at t equal to 0, will simply be the discounted back value. The required rate of return is given to be 13.2%. The discounted back value would be this upon 1.132, and that can be the, or that will be the value using a 1 year holding period dividend discount model. So the total cash flows, however, the cash flows are coming at the end of the year. So how much will we be willing to pay for these cash flows today? We need a return of 13.2%. So if we pay a value discounted back by 13.2%, then essentially we will get a 13.2% return over the 1 year period if we pay a price equal to $11.88. So 0.93 is the present value of the dividend. 11.88, my apologies, is the present value of the year-end price. So the current value is $12.81. So if we pay $12.81, then essentially over the year we are expected to make a return of 13.2%. Similarly, we can value using a 2 year holding period. So a stock recently paid a dividend of $1, which is expected to grow at 5% per year. The required rate of return is 13.2%. Calculate the value of the stock assuming that it will be priced at $14.12 2 years from now. So once again, we'll draw the timeline. At t equal to 0, it was a $1 dividend, it doesn't matter. T equal to 1, the dividend will be 1 into 1.05. At t equal to 2, the dividend will be 1 into 1.05 to the power 2. So on and so forth. The dividend will keep growing. At the end of 2 years, we will also be able to sell the stock for $14.12. Again, to calculate the value of these cash flows today, or how much should we pay for the stock today, that is at t equal to 0, such that we make a return of 13.2%, simply discount the first cash flow by 13.2%. The second cash flow will be discounted 2 years back, so divided by 1.132 squared, and this is the value that we would be willing to pay for the stock today. This is a 2 year holding period DDM. So we can do the calculation and verify that the stock price will come out to be $12.81 again using the 2-period dividend discount model. Now, many a times a firm may not be willing to pay a very high dividend or may not be paying a dividend at all because the growth opportunities may be very good and the firm is reinvesting all the money for sustainable growth in the future because the opportunity is quite nice. So for such firms, it is difficult to project dividends because of the continuous reinvestment. So what we can do for such companies is that instead of discounting the dividends, that is projecting and discounting back the dividends, we can project the free cash flow to equity and try and discount it back to compute the present value of the firm or to compute the value of the equity. So the free cash flow to equity, as we studied in the review on financial reporting and analysis, if you haven't yet watched that video, you can watch the video and then confirm this. So we'll study free cash flow to equity in detail in financial reporting. Is the cash flow available to equity holders? It may be paid out as dividends or may not have been paid as dividends, but this is the cash that is available to equity holders, may or may not be paid as dividends. Once again, it is the cash available to equity shareholders. So calculated as the net income plus the depreciation, that is a non-cash expense, minus increase in working capital, minus any capital expenditures or fixed capital investment that the company has to make, so all those cash flows, minus any return of debt or principal payments on the debt, plus any new debt that has been issued or new money that has come in, is the net cash available to equity shareholders. So the free cash flow to equity can also be discounted back in a very similar manner. Just like we discounted back dividends, we can also discount back free cash flow to equity to compute the value of the equity. The same formula can also be written as the cash flow from operations minus the capital expenditures or the fixed capital investment plus the net borrowing, that is the new issuances minus the debt principal payments. The discount rate that we were using as 13.2% in the previous questions can be calculated as the risk-free rate plus beta times expected return on the market minus the risk-free rate. So this is termed as the market risk premium. And beta is a measure of how risky the stock is or how risky a particular equity is. We will prove this formula and study in more detail when we study portfolio management. For now, you can just remember it, just like you remembered in corporate finance. This is the same model as the capital asset pricing model, or CAPM. That is, the cost of equity is RF plus beta times the market risk premium, that is the expected return on the market minus the risk-free rate. We can value preferred stock just like we valued a fixed income security. So we studied that the preferred stock pays a fixed dividend until infinity. So it pays a fixed dividend. There is no date of maturity, or there is no known pre-decided date of maturity. So the fixed dividend will keep coming till infinity. So we can discount it back at the cost of preferred stock to derive the value of the preferred stock. So we'll prove very soon that these dividends don't grow, and this value will come out to be equal to the preferred dividend upon the cost of the preferred equity. So if a company is $150 par preferred stock, pays a $7.5 annual dividend and has a required rate of return of 9%, then the value of the preferred stock can be calculated as the dollar dividend upon the cost of the preferred stock, or the required return on the preferred stock, that is 9% or 0.09, which will come out to be $83.33. So if a company is promising to pay me $7.5, then to buy that preferred equity, I would be willing to pay $83.33. That is what would ensure that I make an annualized return of 9%. We now move on to arguably the most important derivation of the review on equity valuation. So this is called the Gordon growth model. This is also a dividend discount model. But with certain assumptions. So in the Gordon growth model, it is assumed that the dividend, that is the last year's dividend, would continue to grow at a constant rate of G. So G is the constant growth rate at which dividends will grow up till infinity. So every year the dividend will keep growing at the rate of G. KE is the cost of equity. And we are asked to derive the intrinsic value of the equity, or the present value of these dividends, that is the price that we would be willing to pay for the stock today. So at t equal to 0, if we receive a dividend of D naught and the dividend grows at the rate of G, then at t equal to 1, we will receive D naught into 1 plus G. At t equal to 2, we would receive D naught into 1 plus G to the power 2, so on and so forth until infinity. So at t equal to infinity, we would receive D naught into 1 plus GC to the power infinity. The cash flow at the end of year 1 would be discounted back by 1 plus KE. Cash flow at the end of year 2 would be discounted back by 1 plus KE to the power 2. At the end of year 3, we would get 1 plus KE to the power 3, so on and so forth until infinity. At t equal to infinity, we will receive a cash flow equal to D naught into 1 plus GC to the power infinity upon 1 plus KE to the power infinity. That will be the present value. Now, this is the intrinsic value of the stock that is paying us dividends till infinity. Please note that this series is called a geometric progression. A geometric progression is a series in which each term is the same as the previous term multiplied by a common ratio. That's what a geometric progression is. So each term is the same as the previous term multiplied by a common ratio. So is this series a geometric progression? And if yes, what is the common ratio? So in this series, each term is the same as the previous term multiplied by a common ratio equal to 1 plus G upon 1 plus KE. Now it can very easily be proved, and you've all studied this at 9th or 10th grade in school, that the sum of a geometric progression till infinity, the sum of a geometric progression till infinity is given as the first term divided by 1 minus the common ratio. The first term in this case is d naught into 1 plus g, that is the dividend at the end of year 1, or the dividend in the coming year you can say, upon 1 plus ke. This is the first term, upon 1 minus the common ratio. The common ratio, as we've derived, is nothing but 1 plus g upon 1 plus ke. So if we simplify this, 1 plus ke would be common in the denominator. This would become 1 plus ke minus 1 plus g. 1 plus ke would get cancelled, and this would be d naught into 1 plus g divided by ke minus g. Please note the 1 will also get cancelled. Or it can be written as d1, that is the next year's dividend, or the dividend at t equal to 1, and that is the dividend in the end of the coming year, upon ke minus g, that is the present value or the intrinsic value of the stock. The assumptions of the Gordon growth model. First, it assumes that dividends are the appropriate measure of shareholder wealth. This is generally true for minority shareholders. So if you own, let's say, just about 100 shares in a company, or let's say a 0.1% of a company, then you don't have a say in the management, you don't have a say in the cash flows, how they will be diverted, the investments that will be made, the capex, etc. So a minority shareholder is pretty much dependent on the majority shareholders to declare a dividend and give the money back. So if you're taking a minority shareholder's perspective, then the Gordon growth model, or a dividend discount model for that matter, may be a good approach to valuing the stock, because a minority shareholder is dependent on the dividends for his return. It is assumed that the dividends will grow at a constant growth rate of g till infinity. So that rate has to be known, and slight fluctuations in this rate can cause big fluctuations in the value. The required rate of return on the stock, KE, is also never expected to change. So in a way, interest rates, risk profile is expected to remain constant. If any of these assumptions is not met, then the model will not be appropriate. However, assuming that we can assume these things, then we can use the Gordon growth model to value the stock as d1 upon ke minus g. Please note, another constraint is that ke must be greater than g. So the cost of equity must be greater than g, otherwise this term will become negative and you'll get a negative stock value. So generally speaking, this model can be used for mature dividend paying companies. That is, companies where growth rates have moderated to a constant level and they will now pretty much grow in line with the GDP, and the cost of equity is higher than the growth rate. It's a dividend paying company. So generally for mature stage companies, a Gordon growth model can be used, and for companies that are younger in their business cycle or in their life cycle, we may have to use a 2-stage or 3-stage model. So in a 2-stage model, what we do is that there is one stage of high growth which is explicitly forecasted and discounted back, and then we assume that the company will become mature after a point in time and then apply the Gordon growth model. Similarly, in a 3-stage model, we assume an initial period of very high growth, then a second period of moderate growth, and then eventually we say that the company will mature and there will be a constant growth rate, and then apply the Gordon growth model. This is normally the last stage of a multi-stage model, or it can be used to value mature companies that are paying dividends. Calculate the value of a stock that paid $3 dividend last year if dividends are expected to grow at 8% forever and the required return on equity is 15%. So please note, again, last year's dividend doesn't matter. Even if dividends are growing at a constant rate of 8%, what we are interested in is D1, that is a dividend at t equal to 1. And then we discount it back to bring the value at t equal to 0, or the present value or the intrinsic value, as D1 upon KE minus G. So first let's estimate D1. D1 is $3. So it paid $3 last year, so 3 into 1.08 is D1. Cost of equity is given to be 15%, and the growth rate or G is given to be 8%. So it will be 3 into 1.08 divided by 0.15 minus 0.08, that is $46.28. So that is an application of the Gordon growth model. Using the data from the previous example, calculate how much of the estimated stock value is due to dividend growth. So we'll go back. In the same question, we derive the value as $46.28. So please note that some part of the value is coming from the sustained sales that the company is doing right now, and a part is coming because those sales and the income will grow in the future as well. So the question asks, what part of this value is coming from current dividend and what part of the value is coming from dividend growth? So please note that if we assume that there is no growth, that is, the required return on equity is 15% and the dividend does not grow, so basically this $3 continues forever. What will be the value of the stock? The value will be simply D1 upon K, that is, it will simply be 3 divided by 0.15. You know G is 0. This is how we can prove the preferred dividend model as well. Remember, the preferred dividend valuation was DP upon KP. It's a similar proof as the Gordon growth model, only in D1 upon KE minus G, this G is now 0, so it will just be D1 upon KE or DP upon KP, because the preferred dividend or a constant dividend does not grow. So even if this company had a constant $3 dividend that did not grow, the stock price would have had a value equal to 3 upon 0.15, that is equal to $20. However, we've derived that the total stock price or the total value is about $46.28. So can we say that $20 is coming from current dividend and the remaining $26.28 is coming from growth opportunities or growth in this dividend? Even if the stock didn't grow, there would have been a value of $20. The 26.28 is also called PVGO, or the present value of growth opportunities. Please note in the explanation, he assumes 3.24 to remain constant, so you can skip the explanation. What we've done is more correct, assuming that this $3 doesn't grow at all. So just to refresh and wind up the Gordon growth model, the value of the stock is given as D1 upon KE minus G. So as the difference between KE and G widens, the denominator will become bigger, so the value of the stock will fall. As this difference narrows, the denominator will become smaller and the value of the stock will rise. Small changes in KE and G can cause large changes in the stock value, as you can verify from any of the previous examples. If you even change KE or the growth assumption mildly, because there's a lot of compounding happening, that G will get compounded till infinity. So even a small change in G or KE can have a large change in the value. That is why you have to be very careful when you're using the Gordon growth model, because it will be very subject to estimation and modeling bias. Now, the dividend will be estimated by the company and industry analysis that we studied in the previous section. The cost of equity will be estimated using the CAPM or a similar method that we studied in portfolio management. The growth rate that the company will achieve will be a function of the reinvestment that the firm has made. So we studied the proof of this in financial reporting and analysis. So there are various ways of estimating the growth. So to estimate the growth rate in dividends, the analyst can use the historical growth rate and assume that as a projection of the future. Or he can use the median industry dividend growth rate and say that the growth will sooner or later normalize to the industry dividend growth rate and use that as an input into his model. Or he can estimate the sustainable growth rate, the proof you will find in financial analysis and techniques, wherein we studied financial reporting and analysis. So the sustainable growth rate will be whatever the company retains, that is 1 minus the dividend payout ratio, also known as the retention ratio. So if the company pays everything as dividends, then the income will remain constant. So you earned and you paid everything. There will be no growth on the income. If the company, however, reinvests this income, then to the extent it has reinvested, the income next year will be even higher. So the growth is equal to the reinvestment ratio, or rather the retention ratio, multiplied by the return that the company is generating on that retained earnings. It is the retention ratio into the ROE, that will be the sustainable growth rate for a company. You can watch the proof in detail in the FRA section. So Fish Incorporated is expected to pay dividends equal to 25% of earnings. Fish's ROE is 21%. Calculate and interpret its sustainable growth rate. So the sustainable growth rate will be 1 minus the payout ratio or the retention ratio into the ROE, that is 21%. So it will come out to be 15.75%. So generally such high growth rates are not very sustainable. So the analyst should also examine the growth rate for the industry and the historical growth rate to determine whether this estimate is reasonable. So at least for the Gordon growth model, in the short run, yes, companies can grow at a very high rate if they have a niche opportunity or if they're in a nascent industry. But in the long run, and we are projecting growth till infinity in the Gordon growth model, so we should be more careful when we input. That we shouldn't mistake short-term growth for long-term growth. So such very high growth rates generally may not be sustainable. So the analyst may want to moderate it or use a 2-stage or a 3-stage model as we discussed. So we'll continue the discussion on equity valuation in the coming session. Thanks a lot and see you next time.
So we'll understand the dividend discount model with a few more examples. So a firm pays no dividend but is expected to pay a dividend at the end of year 4. Year 4 earnings are expected to be $1.5 and the firm will maintain a payout ratio of 50%. Assuming a constant growth rate of 5% and a required rate of return of 10%, estimate the current value of this stock. So in questions of this type, it always helps to first draw a timeline so that we understand better what is asked of us. So the firm is paying no dividend for the first 3 years. And at the end of year 4 is when the first dividend comes. So t equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is when the first dividend comes. And from year 5 onwards, this dividend is expected to grow at the rate of 5%. So probably the firm is in the investment phase for the first 3 years. So no dividend coming here. $1.5 coming at the end of year 4, which will grow at the rate of 5%. So 1.5 into 1.05, 1.5 into 1.05 square, so on and so forth until infinity. So once we've drawn the timeline, the question is then of discounting these cash flows back or these dividends back at t equal to 0 so as to compute the value of the stock. Remember, we're using the dividend discount model, which says that the present value of the stock is nothing but the discounted back value of all future dividends that the stock will pay to its shareholders, because eventually it is the dividends that the shareholders receive from holding equity of a stock. Now, we learned the Gordon growth model, which could be applied to dividends that are growing at a constant growth rate of G, given a cost of equity of K, as the discounted back value of the dividends would be D1 upon K minus G, where D1 is the next year's dividend. So in this question, if we assume that t equal to 3 is t equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth, then can we see that D1, that is the dividend at t equal to 4, is actually growing at the rate of 5% till infinity? The Gordon growth model gives us the present value of the stock at t equal to 0. So the first year's dividend is used to compute the value at t equal to 0, that is 1 year back. So if we apply the Gordon growth model to the cash flow at t equal to 4, or the dividend at t equal to 4, it will give us the discounted back value at t equal to 3, that is t equal to 0, assuming that the first cash flow is at t equal to 4. So D1 is nothing but 1.5 upon K minus G will be the value at t equal to 3. The cost of equity is given to be 10% and the insistent growth rate is 5%. So 1.5 upon 0.1 minus 0.05 will give us the value at t equal to 3 of these cash flows. And let's use our calculators and solve the question. So 1.5 divided by 0.05 will come out to be $30. So $30 is the value at t equal to 3. We need to compute the value at t equal to 0. So we'll discount it back another 3 years at a rate of return of 10%, or the cost of equity of 10%. So this will be 30 upon 1.1 to the power 3. We could have also used the TVM sheet of the calculator to do this discounting. So we'll just enter 30 as FV, so just press FV, press 0 as PMT, press 10 as I by Y, press 3 as N, and compute PV. Comes out to be $22.539. So 22.539 is the current value of this stock. Let's do one more question. Consider a stock with dividends that are expected to grow at 15% per year for 4 years, after which they are expected to grow at 5% per year indefinitely. The last dividend paid was $2 and the cost of equity is given to be 10%. Calculate the value of this stock using the multi-stage growth model. Now, this is a very important concept and is applied in many real-world applications. So, a lot of times what we've seen is for less mature companies or for fast-growing companies, there is initially a phase of very high growth. For instance, in this stock, for the first 4 years, earnings are expected to grow at 15%, after which it is assumed that the company will mature and the growth will stabilize to a more reasonable 5% per year level. So when there is a high growth period and then a consistent growth period, it often makes sense to apply a two-stage Gordon growth model or a two-stage dividend discount model. So in the first stage, we explicitly project the dividends and discount them back. And then in the second stage, we apply the Gordon growth formula, which is when the earnings are expected to grow at a more reasonable rate till infinity. A lot of times we can have a three-stage model also. So if there is one very high growth phase, then a medium growth phase, and then a long-term consistent slow growth rate when the company matures. So let's understand the two-stage Gordon growth model. Once again, we'll first plot the timeline and then discount the cash flows back. So the last dividend paid was $2. So at t equal to 0, this is the dividend that we will not get. The last dividend paid was $2. At t equal to 1, we will get a dividend that is 15% higher, that is 2 into 1.15. At t equal to 2, the dividend would be 2 into 1.15 square. Similarly, 2 into 1.15 to the power 3. And at t equal to 4, 2 into 1.15 to the power 4. After which, the growth will mellow down to 5%. So the dividend would be D4, that is 2 into 1.15 to the power 4 into 1.05. At t equal to 6, it will be the dividend at D5 into 1.05 again. This is where the growth will now be down to 5% till infinity. So once again, we've plotted the expected dividends. We now need to discount them back to get the value of the stock at t equal to 0. Now, like we did in the previous question, if we assume that D4 or t equal to 4 is t equal to 1 and t equal to 3 is t equal to 0, then the dividend at t equal to 4 is growing consistently at the rate of 5%. So assuming this as t equal to 1 or 2 into 1.15 to the power 4 as t equal to 1, all these cash flows, including the one at t equal to 4, can be discounted back using the Gordon growth formula as d1 upon ke minus g. This will be the value at t equal to 3, because I'm discounting the cash flow at t equal to 4. So this is the first cash flow that I'm discounting, and the value would be 1 period back, or it will be discounted 1 period back at t equal to 3. So assuming t equal to 4 as t equal to 1, and this is the dividend which we know is growing at the rate of 5%. The value of all cash flows after t equal to 3, or rather all dividends after t equal to 3, can be calculated as 2 into 1.15 to the power 4 upon ke minus g. Ke is 0.1 and the consistent growth rate is 5%. So this is what needs to be added to the cash flows at t equal to 3 so as to bring us the total value of the cash flows including and after t equal to 3, or the dividends including and after t equal to 3. Thereafter, each of these cash flows has to be discounted back to t equal to 0 so as to get us to the value of the stock. So let's calculate. First, let's calculate the Gordon growth formula. So it will be 1.15 y to the power x 4 multiplied by 2 will give us 3.49 divided by 0.05. 69.96 is the value of the cash flows from t equal to 4 till infinity. We'll store this in the memory register 1. 1.15 to the power 3 multiplied by 2 is the dividend coming at t equal to 3. Is the dividend coming at t equal to 3. We'll store this in the memory register 2. Again, 1.15 to the power 2 multiplied by 2 is the dividend coming at t equal to 2. We'll store this in the memory register 3. And 1.15 into 2 is the dividend coming at t equal to 1. We'll store this in the memory register 4. The next step is to discount all these cash flows back to t equal to 0. So we'll first go into the cash flow sheet. That's where we'll input all the cash flows. So press CF, then press second and press clear work. So you'll see the cash flow sheet would be cleared. No cash flow coming at t equal to 0. So we can simply go ahead. At CO1, we will get the cash flow at t equal to 1, that is 2 into 1.15, which we've stored in memory register 4. So we'll recall 4 and press enter. Scroll down, let the frequency be 1 since this cash flow is coming once. At t equal to 2, we've stored the value in the memory register 3. This is what the dividend is coming. So recall 3 and press enter. Scroll down again, let the frequency be 1. At t equal to 3, what we are getting is the dividend itself plus the discounted back value of all future dividends from t equal to 4 onwards. So at t equal to 3, we will recall 2, that is the dividend itself coming at t equal to 3, plus recall 1, that is the discounted back value or the Gordon growth formula, which will be $73 approximately, and press enter. So we've entered our dividends into the calculator, and then we need to just discount them back at the rate of 10%. So press the button NPV, press I as 10 and press enter. Scroll down and press compute. So you see 59.124 is the fair value or the present value of the stock at t equal to 0 as given by the multi-stage, or in this case the two-stage Gordon growth or dividend discount model. So important question, make sure you understand the calculation again. You can verify that if you applied the Gordon growth formula from t equal to 4 onwards, that is, assume t equal to 5 as t equal to 1, and then apply the Gordon growth formula, since a lot of times students have a confusion that the 5% growth is happening from t equal to 5. So why have we applied the Gordon growth formula from t equal to 4 itself? So you can try and do that, you'll get this exact same answer. So you'll have to discount back 4 cash flows, explicitly apply the Gordon growth at t equal to 5, so that the d1 upon ke minus g will be the value at t equal to 4, and then these 4 cash flows, you'll discount them back. You'll again exactly get $59.12. That will remove your confusion, that as a common doubt that students ask me. So even if you apply it at t equal to 5 or t equal to 6 also, if you apply it and then discount these 5 cash flows back, you'll still get the exact same answer. So that was about the discounted cash flow models. Please note that just like we discounted back dividends, we could have discounted back free cash flow to firm to compute firm value, or we could have discounted back free cash flow to equity rather than dividends to compute the value of equity. We'll study more of that at level 2. At level 1, the idea is just to give us an introduction to equity valuation. But please note that this is how the basic concept of discounting works. It remains the same. So at level 2, we're going to do this exact same thing again. And please note that instead of dividends, we could use other definitions of cash flows as well to compute the value of the firm or the value of equity. The next valuation approach is the valuation using price multiples. So the rationale behind using price multiples is pretty straightforward. The idea basically is called the law of one price. That is, assets with similar characteristics should have a similar price or a similar valuation. So if this is a pen 1, which is a red pen for instance, and this is another pen, exactly the same pen but black in color. If the red pen of the exact same make and type costs $10, then the value for the black pen, it's just the ink that's different, everything else is the same, should also be thereabouts or should also be around $10. So that's the rationale behind the method of comparables that we'll study, which says that comparable things should have comparable valuations and comparable prices. So if company 1 has earnings of $10 per share or an EPS of $10 and has a price equal to $100, then a company 2 in the same industry, in the same category, which has an earnings of $20 should have what price? So the growth prospects are the same, the suppliers, the product, the commodity is exactly the same. A $10 earnings, we are willing to pay $100 price. For a $20 earnings, which are also going to grow in a similar fashion, we will be willing to pay a price of $200. That is a price to earnings of 10 times. So again, a rationale is that similar assets and similar companies should have similar valuations, similar price earnings multiple, similar price to book, similar price to sales, etc. The rationale for using price multiples: first of all, they are readily available and can easily be calculated. So the price to earnings multiple, as we will see in questions to follow, can be very easily calculated because the stock price is also available publicly if it's a listed company, and the earnings estimates are also, either past earnings are reported and available, or earnings estimates are also very easily available most of the times. Can be computed for time series as well as cross-sectional data. So the price to earnings ratio for a particular stock or a particular company can be compared across time. So what price to earnings has the stock been trading at throughout time? That is last year, last month, average of last 5 years, average of last 10 years, can all be done. So it can be computed for time series data. It can also be computed for cross-sectional data. That is, the price to earnings multiple of one company, of the second company, of the third company, of different industries can all be compared. So at any point in time, what price earnings multiple is one company or one industry trading at vis-a-vis another company or another industry can also be very easily calculated and compared. Many ratios have actually been seen to be useful in prediction. That is, low price to earnings multiples is generally associated with higher returns. Rather, lower multiples are associated with higher returns. So for the same earnings, a lower price to earnings multiple implies that the market is not valuing the company very richly. Whereas for the same earnings of, let's assume, $10, if the stock price is $300, that is, the company is making an earnings per share of $10 and people are willing to pay a price of $300 for purchasing those earnings or purchasing that stock, then that means the stock is more richly valued, or people either expect these earnings to grow very rapidly or the stock is probably overvalued. So we've generally seen that lower multiples are associated with higher returns in the long run. So this is the rationale for using a price multiple based approach. The critique is that the denominator may be historical, and if you are using projected earnings, then the projections may differ amongst analysts and amongst estimates, and ratios may be very different, or the projections may actually turn out to be incorrect. So historical earnings may not be a good representation of the potential, as the earnings may grow or may change rapidly in the future. So denominator, if it is historical, it may not be the right representation, and if you're using projected values, then again the projections may be accurate or inaccurate, and hence the ratios may change. Depending on the estimate. So price multiples based approach can be done on a comparable basis, as we just explained with the example of the pen and with the example that similar assets should have similar price. That is the method of comparables. Whereas price multiples based on fundamentals essentially use a Gordon growth type approach, or a more fundamental approach, to calculating the price multiple and then valuing the stock. So the more common multiples that are used in valuation are the PE ratio, or the price earnings ratio, that is the firm's stock price divided by the earnings per share, and it is widely used by analysts because earnings are actually what shareholders get. Earnings all belong to the shareholders. So stocks in similar industries with similar earnings should have a similar price, or the price to earnings ratio should be constant if the growth outlook and the industry and the business dynamics are similar. Similarly, if the growth outlook and the industry is similar, then the price to sales ratio should also be similar, or the price to book value should also be similar. Price to sales is simply the firm's stock price divided by the sales per share, and the price to book ratio is the firm's stock price divided by the book value of equity per share. Please note, book value of equity is also called the net worth. It is generally equal to the contributed capital, which is the paid up earnings plus the additional paid up capital plus the retained earnings. That is the net worth or the book value of equity. It represents the amount of investment that shareholders have made in the company. So the price to book ratio should also be similar, implies that for similar investments in similar industries, the price to book multiple should be constant, or similar investments should yield similar value if the industry is similar and everything about the firms is similar. We can use the price to cash flow ratio also, again arguing that similar firms should have the same price to cash flow multiple. That is the ratio of the stock price divided by the cash flow per share. Often there is some confusion about the definition of the cash flow, so it can be operating cash flow or free cash flow to firm or free cash flow to equity, depending on what the analysts are more comfortable with. So we'll first understand the multiples based on fundamentals. These are also referred to as the justified price multiples or the fundamental price multiples based on the growth expectations and the dividend expectations from the stock. So we studied in the previous review that the Gordon growth model can be used for valuing companies which have a long-term constant growth rate of G, as the price at t equal to 0 would be given as the next year's dividend, that is the dividend at t equal to 1 upon k minus G. Now, if we divide both sides by the forward earnings or by the next year's earnings, then we'll get the price to earnings multiple. If the price is given by d upon k minus G, then the price to earnings multiple should be given as d upon E upon k minus G, where d upon E is referred to as the payout ratio of the stock, or what part of the earnings is the company willing to pay out as dividends. So it will be the payout ratio upon k minus G. So if we know the payout ratio, if we know the cost of equity, and if we know the expected growth rate until infinity, then we can compute the fair price to earnings multiple. If the actual price to earnings multiple at which the stock is trading is greater than this, then we will say the stock is overvalued. If the actual price earnings multiple is lesser than this price earnings or this fair price earnings multiple, then we will say that the stock is undervalued. This is how we can compute multiples based on fundamentals. But again, the problem here is that we need an estimate of the long-term growth. We need an estimate of the cost of equity until infinity. If these estimates are wrong, or even if they change slightly, the value of the firm can change by a big amount, as we studied in the Gordon growth model. So this calculation that we've done is referred to as the leading P by E, because we're dividing it by the next year's earning or the forward earnings. If we divided both sides by last year's earnings, then P0 upon E0 would be called the lagging P by E multiple. So please note that D1 can be written as D0 into 1 plus G, So the lagging P by E multiple would be equal to the payout ratio into 1 plus G upon K minus G. Let's do an example and understand it better. So a firm has an expected dividend payout of 50%, a required rate of return of 10%, and an expected growth rate of 5%. Calculate the firm's fundamental or the justified leading P by E ratio. The justified leading P by E ratio or the justified P by E ratio would be given as the payout ratio divided by KE minus G. It's the leading, that is the price upon next year earnings, will be payout upon KE minus G. The payout ratio is given to be 50% or 0.5, rate of return of 0.1 and a growth rate of 0.05. So it will be 0.5 upon 0.05, that is 10 times or 10. So the justified or fair earnings multiple that the stock should trade at is 10 times. What that means is that if the earnings is $10 in the future or next year, then the stock price today should be about $100. If it is more than $100, it's overvalued. If it's less than $100, then it is undervalued. Jolt Industries makes decorative items. The figures below are for Jolt and its industry. Dividend payout ratio is given to be 35%. The average for the industry is 16%. Sales growth is 8.5%. The industry average is 3.9%. Similarly, total debt to equity is given for the industry as well as for Built. Which of these factors would suggest a higher fundamental P by E ratio for Built Industries as compared to the industry? So we know that the fundamental P by E can be given as the payout ratio divided by K minus G. So if all else is constant, just looking at the payout ratio, which should have a higher P by E, Built or the industry? Built. So the payout ratio definitely suggests a higher multiple that Built should get as compared to the industry, because everything else being the same, Built has a higher payout ratio. The growth rate for Built is expected to be more than the industry. Industry is having 3.9, whereas sales growth for Built is 8.5%. My apologies, it's not Jolt, it's Built Industries. Again, if G is higher, that means K minus G would be lower, or the denominator would be lower, hence the P by E multiple would be higher. So again, since the growth is higher, all else being the same, this also implies a higher multiple. The total debt to equity for Built Industries is 200%, wherein the industry average is only 68%. What does this imply? Using the same formula, assuming the payout ratio is the same, the growth rate is the same, a higher debt to equity generally implies more risk, because debt will have to be serviced come what may, and debt has a high fixed cost. So more risk will imply high cost of equity or high discount rate. So the debt to equity is high, then the cost of equity would be higher, implying a lower multiple, all else being the same. In this case, we don't know if the higher payout and the higher sales growth will make up for this high debt to equity, but if all else was the same, just a high debt to equity would imply a high cost of equity and hence a lower P by E multiple as the denominator becomes bigger. As discussed in the beginning, price multiples can also be used based on comparables. So we can use the price multiple, that is the price to earnings, price to sales, or price to book, to evaluate whether an asset is properly valued relative to the benchmark. The benchmark can often be the stock's own historical PE multiple, that is the last 10 years average PE multiple, or the PE multiple of similar stocks, because similar assets should have similar price and similar valuation or similar multiples. Or we can use the multiple of the stock against the industry multiple. So if the steel industry is trading at a price earnings of 10 times, then the stock that is higher than 10 times can be thought to be relatively overvalued, and vice versa. As discussed earlier, the law of one price says that similar assets should have a similar valuation and a similar price. Analysts should, however, always be careful and ensure that any comparables used really are comparable. So a steel industry or a steel company should be compared with another steel company and not an FMCG company or an auto company. Similarly, an FMCG company should be compared with another FMCG company. So comparables used should really be comparable, otherwise we will have the wrong interpretation. Some disadvantages of the comparables method. A stock may appear overvalued by the comparable method and undervalued by the fundamental method that we studied earlier, or vice versa. Hence there would be some confusion as to which one to use. Different accounting methods can result in price multiples that are not comparable. So if one company is following the POCM method, another company is following the project completion method, then even though the projects may be similar and valuation and overall earnings may be similar, the earnings may not be comparable, because for one project or one company earnings are coming every year based on the POCM method, whereas for another company the earnings will all be bunched up at the end when the project gets completed. So different accounting methods can result in earnings that are not comparable, and because earnings are not comparable, the price multiples will also not be comparable. So we have to be careful again that we are actually comparable similar earnings and similar companies. For cyclical firms, price multiples can be greatly affected by the economic conditions. So earnings can often turn negative during bad times and can become highly positive during good times. So if we just use a standard 10 times multiple, if we say that the price to earnings should be 10 times, then in bad times when earnings are, let's assume, just $1, we will blindly say that the price should be $10. And in good times when the earnings are, let's say, $100, we'll again apply a 10 times multiple and say that the price should be $1,000. Whereas the price should actually neither be 10 nor be 1000, because the earnings have to be adjusted for the cycle. Just because the cycle is bad and earnings are low doesn't mean we'll give the same blanket multiple at all points in time. So multiples should be higher during very bad times, because you know that the bad times will reverse. And multiples should be lower during very good times, because you know that even these good times are not sustainable. The following figures are for Minnie's Bakery. All figures except the stock price are in millions. Except the stock price, that is the stock price here. Everything else is in millions of dollars. Calculate Minnie's lagging P by E, price to cash flow, price to sales, and price to book ratios. Judge whether the firm is undervalued or overvalued using the following relevant industry averages for 2009 and the firm's historical trend. So lagging multiples imply that the stock price would be the current stock price, whereas the earnings would be the previous year's earnings, or the cash flow would be the previous year's cash flow, or the sales per share, or the previous year's book value per share. If it was a leading P by E, then the current price divided by next year's earnings, or the next year cash flow, next year sales, is what we would imply. So let's do it for 2009, and we can similarly do it for 2008 and 2007. So first let's calculate the price to earnings. That will be the stock price divided by the earnings per share. The earnings per share can be calculated as the net income, that is 3.2 million, divided by the number of shares, that is 4.476 million. So it will be 3.2 divided by 4.476. Please note this will be the lagging P by E for 2009, because this is the stock price as of the end of 2009, and the earnings are not of 2010. The earnings are for the previous year, that is 2009. So this is the EPS, and the price divided by the EPS would give us the lagging P by E ratio. Similarly, the lagging price to cash flow ratio can be computed as the price per share, that is 11.4, divided by the cash flow per share. The cash flow per share can be calculated as 17.9 divided by 4.476. So again, the price divided by this cash flow per share will give us the price to cash flow ratio. Similarly, we can calculate the sales per share, that is the net revenues divided by 4.476 would be the sales per share, and we can then compute the price to sales, or the price to book, that is $55.6 million is the book value, or whatever shareholders have invested in the company up till now, divided by 4.476 is the book value per share. The price divided by the book value per share will be the price to book ratio. they'll all be lagging because we are using the price as of end of 2009 and the parameters of 2009, that is the previous year. Similarly, we know the price as of end of 2008 and 2007, and we can compute the ratios for 2008 and 2007 and calculate the price to earnings, price to cash flow, price to sales, and price to book on a lagging basis. For leading ratio, we would see the price at 2008 and the book value, earnings, cash flows of 2009. That will be the leading P by E or P by B ratio. The question also gives us the lagging industry ratios for 2009. So for the industry, the price to earnings is 8.6, price to cash flow is 4.6, 1.4 and 3.6. And please verify, you can calculate for 2009 from the previous figure, the price to earnings will come out to be 16 times, 3 times approximately price to cash flow, price to sales, and price to book. Similarly, for 2008, we can calculate from the previous table, and for 2007. So if we look at the lagging ratios of 2009 and compare it with the industry average for 2009, based on price to earnings, we can see how the stock looks a little overvalued. Based on price to cash flow, however, it looks undervalued. Based on price to sales, again it looks undervalued, and on price to book also it looks undervalued. Price to earnings, however, are higher. Probably earnings are depressed for some one-off losses or for some reason, which is why price to earnings it looks overvalued, but on all other metrics it looks cheaper than the industry. We can also compute the average of these three matrices and compare the current earnings or the current multiples with the average of the last 3 years. So if we compute the average P by E, that is sum all these up and divide by 3, we get a number of approximately 61 times. Similarly, average price to cash flow comes out to be around 3.5 times. Average price to sales comes out to be 0.7, and average price to book comes out to be 1 time. So we can compare the current multiple based on the company's own historical average, and we see that it looks undervalued now because historically it is traded at a very high price to earnings. On price to cash flow also it looks undervalued because historically the average has been about 3.5. The price to sales is in line or slightly undervalued because historically again this has been higher than what it is currently at. And so we can say about the price to book. So we can compare the lagging multiples with that of the industry and of the company's own history, and then try to make some assessment of whether the stock currently is undervalued or overvalued. So once again, leading P by E ratio is simply the current price divided by next year's earnings, whereas the lagging P by E ratio is the current price divided by last year's earnings. There is no right or wrong. There is no rule that one has to be used over the other. You can use leading P by E or you can use lagging P by E, but make sure it should be comparable. If you are using the lagging P by E for the stock, then for the industry also you should look at the lagging P by E. And for the other stock also, you should look at the lagging P by E. If you're using the leading P by E, that is the price divided by next year's earnings, then for the industry and the comparables also, you should use the leading P by E. Leading simply means you'll divide it by the next year's variables or the expected variables. You often don't know what the next year's earnings will be, so it will be an estimate. Whereas the lagging ratios will be reported already, or the lagging earnings cash flow, that is last year's, would already be reported, so there will be no estimation in the lagging ratios. Leading ratios are normally based on the next year estimates of earnings, cash flow, sales, book value, etc. Now, just like we studied multiples based on the stock price or the market cap of the company, please note the stock price is nothing but an indication of the market cap of the company or the total market value of equity of the company. We often need to use enterprise value multiples, or it may help to study enterprise value multiples. So please understand that enterprise value is defined as the value of the entire firm or the value of the operating assets. So it's not just the value of the equity, or it is not just the market cap. It is the entire value of the firm's assets. The value of equity is often equal to the value of the assets minus the liabilities or minus the debt, because that is what is remaining to equity holders. Whereas enterprise value is including the value of that debt, that is the value of the entire operating asset. It may be funded by equity or it may be funded by debt. In other words, enterprise value is the amount you have to pay to acquire the asset. It is calculated as the market value of common and preferred equity, that is the market value of equity. So if you want to acquire the asset, that is completely use the asset for your own purpose. You may want to just destroy the asset, just burn it to the ground. If you want to do that, you have to first pay off the equity holders of the asset. So you have to purchase the equity. But even after purchasing the equity, the asset doesn't become completely yours, because there is a debt on that asset, or you may have borrowed money from someone. So you have to retire the debt, that is, pay the market value of debt. So once you've retired the debt, that is, paid back all the borrowing, you've retired all the equity, that is, purchased the equity, then the asset is yours. If the company has any cash or short-term investments, then that cash can be used to pay off the debt. So it is the market value of equity plus the net debt, you can say, or the net debt that has to be paid off. So this is the amount of money you have to pay to acquire the assets of a company, or enterprise value is the value of the operating assets, that is the value of equity plus the value of the net debt, net of cash and short-term investments that you can sell off to repay the debt. After you've paid this much money, then the asset is completely yours. You can do whatever you like with it because you've purchased the equity and you've purchased the debt also. Now, if an asset has a high enterprise value, that is, you have to pay a lot of money to acquire the asset, should it also commensurately generate a high return? Yes, it should. So what is the return that the asset generates? The asset gives us an earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation and amortization, or an EBITDA. So this is the earnings generated by the asset before any interest is paid to the debt holders or before any depreciation or taxes are subtracted. So I will be willing to pay a high enterprise value, or I will be willing to pay a high amount to acquire an asset only if the asset gives me a high EBITDA or high earnings before interest and taxes. Because interest doesn't matter, I have anyways paid off the debt. So a very common multiple in the industry, or a common multiple that is compared amongst assets, is the EV to EBITDA multiple. That is, for the enterprise value of the company, what is the EBITDA that the company is making? Because many a times earnings may be very depressed, or net income can be highly depressed because of a very high interest cost. But if somebody recovers the asset and pays off the debt, then interest cost will go away. So even though net income may be negative because of very high interest, EBITDA should be positive. Because if there is no EBITDA also, then there is no point paying a high enterprise value. So enterprise value, that is the value of the asset, is compared to the EBITDA that the asset is generating, so as to decide whether the asset is overvalued or undervalued. So once we've computed the EV EBITDA multiple, we can use it in much the same way as we used our price-based multiples. That is, compare it with the industry average, compare it with the historical value of the asset, compare it with other assets to decide whether this asset is overvalued or undervalued. A high EV to EBITDA would imply overvaluation. A low EV to EBITDA would imply undervaluation of the asset. But please note, this is now the value of asset, not the value of equity. It is the value of equity plus the value of the net debt. Nicole Incorporated is a manufacturer of small refrigerators and other appliances. The following figures are from Nicole's most recent financial statements, except the market value of long-term debt, which has been estimated from the financial market data. Stock price is given, shares outstanding are given, market value of the debt, book value is given. Calculate the EV to EBITDA multiple. So to compute the EV EBITDA multiple, we will first compute the enterprise value. Enterprise value is nothing but the market value of equity plus the market value of debt minus cash and short-term investments. Market value of equity is simply the stock price multiplied by the number of shares. Market value of debt. Please note, all debt has to be considered. So long-term plus short-term debt. Market value of long-term debt is given to be 700,000. That is a long-term debt. Plus the market value of short-term debt. Please note that for short-term debt, generally the book value and market value is not very different, because the short-term debt is about to be matured in a short period of time, so in the next 1 year or 6 months. So there's not a big difference between the maturity value and the market value. So just the book value of short-term debt would be a good approximation for the market value of short-term debt. Book value of total debt is given 2.5. Book value of long-term debt is given to be 1 million. The book value of short-term debt can be calculated as 2.5 minus 1 million, that is equal to 1.5 million. So the book value of short-term debt is equal to the market value of short-term debt. We actually need the market value, but book value and market value for short-term debt will not be very different. So another 1,500,000 would be the market value of short-term debt minus cash and short-term investments. So cash and marketable securities. If there were any short-term investments or simply investments written, please subtract the investments also. So cash and marketable securities to the tune of $250,000 would be subtracted. And this would give us the enterprise value as 4,000, that is the value of equity, plus 700 plus 1,500 minus 250, that is 5,950 or $5.95 million. So 5,950,000, or you can call it $5.95 million. The EBITDA is about 1.5 million. The EV EBITDA multiple can be calculated as 5.95 divided by 1.5, which will come out to be 5.95 divided by 1.5, that is 3.966 times. So if this number is greater than the industry average or the comparable companies, then we'll say the stock or the asset is overvalued. Otherwise, we'll say the asset is undervalued. Finally, we'll talk about asset-based models. These models are most reliable when the firm primarily has tangible short-term assets or assets whose market values can be readily calculated, or when the firm is being liquidated, that is being sold off piece by piece. So the asset-based model simply says that the market value of equity, so equity is nothing but the assets minus the liabilities. So whatever is the worth of the assets minus the debt and other claims against those assets is remaining to equity shareholders. So market value of the equity would simply be the market value of the assets minus the market value of liabilities. And if the firm is being liquidated, then definitely we are realizing this value immediately. That is, We're selling off the assets, we're paying off our debts, and returning the remaining money to the equity shareholders. So it's another way, just like the comparables method, the multiples, the DCF that we studied. However, it uses the fair market value of the assets and the liabilities on the balance sheet to calculate the fair market value of equity. Divided by the number of shares, you'll get the fair stock price or the fair value of equity per share. American Optical is a publicly traded firm. An analyst estimates that the market value of net fixed assets is 130% of book value. Liability and short-term asset market values are assumed to equal their book values. The firm has 2,000 shares outstanding. Compute the market value of the firm's equity. So, cash has a value of 20,000. Accounts receivable have a market value of 10,000. So, liability and short-term asset market values are equal to their book values. So this is correct. Inventories are also a short-term asset worth 70,000. The net fixed assets have a fair market value of 130% of their book value. So the fair value of the total assets would be another 30,000 because the fair value of these net fixed assets is $30,000 more. So 230,000 is the market value of assets. The market value of all liabilities is assumed to be equal to their book value. So the liabilities are a total of 5,000 of payable plus notes payable, which is similar to debt, plus bank loans of 45,000. So minus $80,000 worth of liabilities, that is the market value of the liabilities, giving us the market value of equity as equal to 230 minus 80. That is equal to $150,000. There are 2,000 shares outstanding. So if we divide this by 2,000, we will get the fair stock price as equal to $75. So that is the asset-based approach of computing the stock price per share or the fair value of equity. To wind up this reading, we'll once again go through the advantages and the disadvantages of the three broad categories of models that we studied in equity valuation. The first was the discounted cash flow models, wherein we explicitly forecasted the cash flows, that is either the dividends or the free cash flow to firm or the free cash flow to equity, and then discounted the cash flows back to compute the present value of the equity or the stock price. The advantage of these models is that they are based on the fundamental concept of discounted present value and are grounded in finance theory. So theoretically, this is a correct and right way of valuing any asset, and they are widely accepted and used in the analyst community. The disadvantage is that the inputs must be estimated, and it may often be difficult to project a firm's earnings 10, 20, 30 years into the future. And again, the valuations are very sensitive to these estimates that go as an input. So the input of growth or the cost of equity or the cash flow that we've projected have a big bearing on what the value will come out to be. So a slight mistake in the estimation of the cash flows can result in big variations in the estimation of the fair value. So very sensitive to the input, and then the inputs are highly uncertain are two disadvantages of the discounted cash flow models. The advantages of using the price multiples based approach is that there is evidence that price multiples can be useful for predicting stock returns. Low multiples are associated with high returns in the future. The price multiples, as we studied, are widely used and are often readily available. They can again be used to compare the firm's multiple over time or the firm's multiple with the industry or with other companies, as in cross-sectional comparisons. We can also use the EV/EBITDA multiple as we calculated when the company has negative earnings or high debt, because the enterprise value will capture the value of the asset, which can be compared with the EBITDA rather than the net income, which can often be negative because of high interest cost or other issues. Disadvantage of using this approach is that lagging price multiples reflect the past. Price multiples may not be comparable across firms if the firms have different size, products, and growth. Price multiples for cyclical firms, as we explained, can be greatly affected by the timing in the cycle or the economic conditions at a point in time. It may appear overvalued by the comparable method but undervalued by the fundamental price multiple method, and vice versa. We also studied that different accounting methods, the POCM against a completion method, as we give an example, can result in price multiples that are not comparable. And a negative denominator may result in a meaningless ratio. So if earnings are negative, then you cannot use the PE ratio, you'll have to use some other ratio. So this was about the advantages and disadvantages of using the price multiples using comparables approach. If you use the price multiples based on fundamentals, that is the price to earnings as we derived, should be equal to the payout ratio upon K minus G. Then, even though this approach would be based on sound theoretical models, very much like the discounted cash flow model, which is where we derive the Gordon growth model and the dividend discount model. So again, theoretically, it's the right way of valuing, that is discounting back cash flows. And they also correspond to widely accepted value metrics and are used in the analyst community. So these are some advantages. The problem again is the same as the problem with the DCF method, that the fundamentals will be very sensitive to inputs. So the K minus G in the denominator, so slight mistake in the estimation of the growth rates or the cost of equity will have a large changes in your valuation estimates. So the same advantages and disadvantages pretty much as of the DCF approach, because the valuation based on fundamentals comes from the DCF originally. Finally, about the asset-based models that we studied in the end. Advantages: they can provide estimates of the fair value. They are most reliable when the firm primarily has tangible short-term assets or assets with ready market values, or when the firm is being liquidated, as we studied. And they are increasingly becoming useful for public firms that have to report fair values of their assets and liabilities. So if we have the fair values, then it's much easier to apply this approach as we studied and to calculate the fair value of equity. The problem is that the market value is often difficult to obtain. They're usually different from the balance sheet values or the book values, because book values are normally recorded on a historical basis, as we studied in financial reporting and analysis. These methods are inaccurate when a firm has a high proportion of intangible assets or future cash flows that are not reflected in the asset values. And finally, these assets can be difficult to value during periods of hyperinflation, because if inflation is very high, hyperinflation is generally regarded as a period where prices are doubling in 3 years or more than 100% inflation in 3 years. So in such times, again, the balance sheet or the historical values will be very different from the current values because inflation is so high. So current values will be much higher than the recorded values on the balance sheet or the book values. So again, this method is generally not recommended in times of hyperinflation. If a firm has a lot of intangible assets, then again the intangible assets many a times are not represented on the balance sheet. So good human resources, good management, good CEO, all these are valuable things that will increase the cash flows of the firm because customers will be happy, more business will come, but they are not recorded on the balance sheet per se today. Hence, these intangibles will not get captured if we use an asset-based model. So that was about an introduction to the methods of equity valuation that are there at level 1. This will form a core part of the syllabus at level 2. So very important that your foundations are good, because we'll study all this and a lot more when we study equity valuation at level 2. So that was about the review on equity valuation. Thanks a lot and see you next time.